Okay, so today I am going to give you a brief overview of figure drawing using the 8-head proportion technique. And as you can see, I'm just using Sharpies today so that you can see this a little bit better on your screen. When you are drawing, you are welcome, of course, to use any medium that you like, pencil, pen, marker, etc. So I'm just using the Sharpies for color. Now, 8 heads, meaning that most people are about 8 heads high, that being the unit of measurement that you would use. So if you would take their head from their top of their head to their chin and then multiply that by 8, that is usually pretty close to their height. And so knowing this, you could use that to create a figure that is in proportion and looks correct. A lot of beginning artists have trouble with vertical proportion, in that they'll start off large and they'll get smaller the further down they get because they're running out of paper or perspective or what have you. So this is a way to get you easily, quote unquote, in perspective and in proportion. So let's say I'm using lined paper here for a reason. Let's say your head is about 2 lines tall, okay? This would be from the top of your head to your chin, okay? This line down here, this would be to about your breast or nipples. This next line would be about your belly button, or where your figure bends. If you put your hands on not your hips, but your high waist, and you bend, and you could feel that's where everything starts to bunch up. That is this next point, your midpoint. This would be your crotch, so the bottom of your crotch, so like the bottom of your zipper area. This would be about mid-thigh. The next one would be right about your knee. The next one would be your shins. And then finally, this would either be the floor, or if you're drawing a figure that is wearing like high heels, this would be the bottom of the heel, and then of course their toe would be a little bit beyond that because it would be pointed down because it would be their heel. Okay, so this is the basic 8 heads. Let me scoot it up just a little bit more. So I'll show you how I approach this. I then usually break the body down into kind of basic points. So we start with the head. We know it's about that size or so. And then I would find where my shoulders go. And usually it'll be a little bit below the chin and between the breast. And usually your shoulders aren't straight across. So I would find the shoulder points. And if you're looking at a photograph of a figure, this would be easier because then you can sort of see where the shoulders lie. So I find about the shoulder points. And incidentally, I lost my cap there. The width of your figure, if you take this down a center line, it's usually 2 heads wide. So you take this width here, turn it on its axis, and then you would get 2 heads wide. So that's about where my shoulders are. I know about the waist area, the mid areas here, of course, and the crotch areas here. And then I figure out where my spine is. And so let's say this particular character is kind of canted off to the side. It's not a perfectly straight spine. They're actually putting their weight on their right leg. And so usually then I start filling in shapes. And usually your upper body is in a kind of a trapezoidal or an inverse triangular shape. For men, this might be even more square. For women, it might be more pronounced. I usually lay in like another inverse trapezoid kind of shape for the hip area, the pubic bone area. And then I like to figure out where my legs are going. So I said he's putting his weight, or she, depending, putting the weight on this leg, right? So they're cocking off to the side. And then maybe this arm is hanging straight down, and this one is just like on the hip, right? So very sketchy. Obviously, if you were doing this in pencil, you did kind of light because then you could go back later and erase some of these. These are just your beginning lines. So looking at this, I've got kind of a basic stick figure here, and it's basically as tall as the figure should be. I come down and find the knee. I know it's going to be somewhere around here. And then I usually find where the ankle is as well, because these are points where you have a lot of articulation, meaning the body's moving. Usually thighs meet pretty close to the center of the crotch, unless you have a huge thigh gap, which is a thing I hear about nowadays. I didn't know they existed before, thank goodness. One less thing to worry about. So usually your thighs, your legs, a rough kind of cylinder shape. Again, same thing for the calves. And notice that your thighs are usually widest towards the body. They come in a little bit towards the knee. Your calves come out here, and then you would have them come in a little bit again at your ankle, which is why I usually find where the ankle point is. And then I just usually lay in like a little kind of triangle-y, rectangle-y, trapezoid shape for the feet. Again, feet are usually wider the further away they are from the ankle, and then they're a little bit smaller towards the ankle, okay? Same thing with legs, with arms. Your hands are actually usually about your mid-thigh. Most people tend to draw them up here around your waist or your hips, but if you stand up and put your hands down to your side, you'll notice they hit around your thigh, so a lot longer than you think. Usually your elbow is right above or right around that midline, that mid-waist line, so you know that's where your elbow is. So that gives you the length, of course, of your upper arm, and then the length of your forearm. And then I just kind of guesstimated over here the same kind of thing, and then I put a little shape in for my hand, okay? Head looks like it could be a little bit wider. I made her head kind of skinny there. Okay, so now I have a very basic shape, very basic outline of the body. And this, again, I would probably do this, like I said, in pencil really lightly. And then I would come back harder, maybe with a pencil that is a higher number, like a 6B or an 8B. We know that's softer, so it'll give me a harder line. It'll give me a darker line, really is what I mean. So I would take, and here I'm just going to use pink, but I would probably, again, like I said, use another pencil a little bit darker to start outlining like the contour of the body. Okay, so start making like firm decisions. I made all these like sketchy pencil lines. Now I'm deciding, okay, this is really where the body's going to be. If this was a woman, I will often use that breast point and sort of lay in where the breasts are as well. Notice she's kind of pointing off to the side a little bit, so her breasts are too. If it was a man, of course, I wouldn't worry about the breast. And again, I just figured out where my contours are. Now remember how I said your calf is usually a little wider, and then it comes in. Okay, your shin's usually pretty straight, so that gives me a calf line, right? Doing the same thing on the other side. If the foot was straight on or the leg was straight on, then you might not see that calf line so much. It would be a little less pronounced, and I'll do that on that side, give you a sense. Upper arm, same thing. They usually start out a little bigger towards the shoulder. They come in towards the elbow, and then they flare out just a little bit from the forearm, and then they're a little bit thinner at your wrist. Now notice I'm not putting a lot of detail into my hands or my feet. Feet, usually they're going to be covered in shoes, right? So you're not even going to see the detail. And then the hand, you know, people worry a lot about the hand because it is a little bit difficult to draw. But I usually, like I said, just kind of have kind of a shape there to show that there is a hand, but I don't get too bogged down in the details because ultimately it really doesn't matter. Unless I'm drawing a specific like glove detail, it doesn't really matter what that hand looks like, okay? It's just to give you a sense of that's where the arms stop because really we're going to worry about the clothing, right? If I had to draw bare feet, and you know, sometimes you will because you'll have characters that need bare feet. Again, your, as I mentioned earlier, your ankle comes back a little bit for that back of your foot. And then you usually have a ball of your foot here, the front part, which is a little bit chubbier, fatter. So here that's how I draw feet from the side view, if you're looking at it from the side. So this gives us a pretty good sense of character. Here would be up here somewhere. We have a very basic body. And so from this, you could start building clothing onto it, right? So this would be in like a darker pencil line. And then I would probably go over in pencil and start outlining clothing, detail, and then come back and erase a lot of these sketchier lines and some of these harder lines where they're not needed, right? So that you just see the clothing. Because ultimately, this is just a way to communicate to the director, to the shop, what the garments should look like, so they can then find them or build them, right? So we want it to look nice, but ultimately it's just a tool, and those are the only people that see them. Additionally, you could choose any kind of stance or position or posture that you want. I chose kind of a very basic one here, just hand on the hip, kind of cocked off to one side. It's a little more interesting than if she was just standing straight and looking at the camera, so to speak. But you can get really creative with your positions. Think about what your characters are like, what kind of positions they might be in. If it's somebody like, Laura from the Glass Menagerie, she's kind of shy and quiet, so you probably wouldn't draw her in this position. This looks a little more assertive, right? So you might pick a pose that communicates something about your character, and that helps communicate your ideas to the director. They can then see their actor in the garment as the character on stage, but also it makes your renderings look a little nicer. It gives it a little more flavor, a little more flair. So we're going to come in with a different color. I'm going to use green this time and start just laying in some clothing. Show you how I would do it. So let's say she's wearing, I don't know, a pantsuit, right? So I would come in and start laying in where my clothing fits, all right? Again, I'm just being kind of sketchy here. Let's say she's wearing a suit. We know it would fit a little straighter. You wouldn't be able to see those contours quite as so much. A little bit of breast, but not a whole lot. And then maybe she's wearing pants. So again, we know pants are usually on top of the contours, and maybe I give it a little bit of, it's got like a crease, they're like really nicely pressed pants. So that gives you a sense of what that garment looks like. And this obviously isn't very detailed. You want to add a lot more detail into it later. But then I would go in and I would start erasing some of these contour lines that I didn't need. If it was shorts or something, then those contour lines help me because I would just keep them because they would be her legs sticking out. But since she's completely covered, I would probably erase all these pink and orange lines and be left with the green line. And then I could go in and start laying in color, laying in texture and pattern to really give you a sense of what this garment looks like. And of course, I am not above, as you've probably discovered by now, I am not above mixing media. So I might take pencil even, or colored pencil, and come in and give myself some shadow or do some of the details that way. Or even mix marker colors. So those green and pink give you kind of this nice, funny grayish color. So you can start adding to and creating your garment and communicating what that garment looks like this way. Okay, so to review, I usually start plotting where my 8 heads are, and you don't have to draw it out as neatly as this. And of course, if the figure is tilted, if it's an odd kind of seating arrangement, then this kind of goes out the window. Now, it'll still be 8 heads tall, but it would just be like if it was seated, you would have to figure out, okay, here's where the thigh is, here's where the knee is, here's where the calf is, here's where the feet are. Okay, so if it's a different figure than just standing up or some variation of standing up, then the heads would just follow along the body, whatever position the body is in. Okay, and these heads would still hit about the same area from the top of the head to the chin, to the breast line, midline, crotch, thigh, knee, shin, floor, and heel. And then again, of course, if you drew a line down this figure, then you would notice that the width is about 2 heads. So 1 head from the spine on this side and 1 head from the spine on this side. After I have a basic layout, just a skeleton, then I usually start putting contour lines on top of that, just very basic geometric shapes at first, and then contouring in more to show musculature. And you can use, of course, images and references. In fact, I use references all the time. I'll go on Google and find a photograph of somebody. They have all those photo stock images now, right? And I will use that as my basic body, and then I'll use my research to look at and get a sense of what the clothing, what the garments in particular look like. So, for example, just drawing pulling out a image from one of my textbooks. We can see this figure here. I'm trying to get him so the light's not shining on him. So you see this figure here. He's standing with his arms folded. He's kind of canted out 3/4, so you get a little bit of his profile. He's about 8 heads tall. So if you measured what his head to his chin was, that would be about his breast line, about his waist, about his crotch, thigh, bottom of the knee, shin, floor. Okay, so he's about 8 heads tall. He's pretty proportioned. But I would use this to draw an interesting figure, and I would just break it down into like where his spine is, where his points of articulation are, like his shoulders, his elbows, where his knee is, and then start drawing basic shapes, and then later come back and contour musculature of his body. All right, so you can use that. You can use pretty much any resource of the body, an image of somebody standing or sitting or in an interesting pose, as your basic outline of the body to give you a sense of good proportion.